Eftel was a middle-aged mage who spent the better part of 40 years studying lightning magic so he could defeat the demon lord alongside the other great heroes. And normally, this would be the point where he is shunned and betrayed for being the weakest member of the hero party. But for once, the people of the kingdom are actually grateful for his contribution. And when the king is thanking them for their great effort in stopping the demon invasion, he announces their rewards. As a reward for their bravery, the king tells them that he will be bestowing the greatest title anyone in the kingdom can have, the title of Emperor. Eftel is shocked to hear this, since the title of Emperor is usually something only nobles can receive, and even then, it's extremely rare. So for him to be receiving such a title truly is a great honor. After crowning the water, fire, and earth heroes as emperors, he then moves on to Eftel, and he says that while Eftel may not be the strongest mage out there, everyone recognizes that the hero party never could have won without his help, so he too will be receiving the title of Emperor. And Eftel is happier than ever before because this moment makes all the sacrifices he made for his training worth it. Several years go by, and Eftel is now a retired old man living in the countryside, and he spends most of his days training the young children whom he has taken in over the years. For today's lesson, Eftel has the kids practice their magic formations while balancing rocks on their heads as a way to teach them how to maintain their focus. A few of the kids struggle with it at first, but they all get the hang of it after a while, and once Eftel is satisfied, he tells them they can finally take a break. The kids are all exhausted, and Eftel commends them for their hard work, but next, he says he wants to see them practice the level 4 magic he taught them last week. However, just as Eftel is done saying that, Merlin speaks up and asks Eftel if he's sure he wants to keep going without taking a break for himself first. Eftel can see that she is genuinely worried about him since he's getting old, but he assures Merlin that he can still bend his knees without the sound of bubble wrap, so a little standing isn't going to tire him out. Eftel recalls the day he first found Merlin. She was the daughter of a demon woman who had gotten caught up in one of his battles. Even though Merlin was a demon, Eftel decided to take her in since there was no way she'd be able to survive on her own out here. And though Merlin is probably too young to remember any of it, Eftel is sure he must have killed dozens of her family members during the war, so he feels a little guilty when she looks at him with such sincere concern. For now, Eftel decides to carry on with the lesson and tells everyone to get ready to go over the level 4 spells again. But Merlin chimes in and asks Eftel if he could actually teach them some level 6 magic today. The other kids don't understand why Merlin would want to learn level 6 magic already when Eftel just taught them level 5 magic yesterday. And Eftel is a little confused as well since he didn't expect to be asked that. He can see that Merlin is eager to learn, but he tells her that there's no need to rush things because she will learn level 6 magic in due time, and for now, he just wants her to keep practicing what she already knows because the fundamentals are very important. Merlin is a little disappointed to hear him say that since she wanted to learn the magic as fast as possible, but she understands Eftel's point and agrees to just focus on the basics for now. Later on, we see Merlin at the entrance of a deep, dark forest, and she's clearly terrified, but she forces herself to be brave and face her fears so she can prove herself. Merlin plans to kill one of the monsters lurking deep inside the forest so she can prove that she is truly worthy to call herself the best student of the Lightning Emperor. That way, she will be able to take over teaching the other kids, and Eftel won't have to work anymore, so he would finally be able to enjoy his retirement. She knows Eftel would never ask her to do something like this, but Merlin wants to help him in whatever way she can. Merlin's heart was in the right place, but clearly, her common sense wasn't, because not even 10 minutes later, she's running for her life trying to escape the forest because she ran into a wolf monster, and all the level 4 magic she knows didn't work on it. Every spell she throws at the monster either misses or fails to do any meaningful damage, and the wolf just keeps charging after her as if nothing happened. She realizes that she won't be able to outrun the wolf, so she decides to take a gamble and attempt to cast some level 6 magic even though she has barely practiced it. Merlin begins the chant for the spell, and despite the fact that the wolf is still charging at her with deadly intent, Merlin manages to stay focused the entire time and complete the spell, firing off a massive thunderbolt at the wolf. Merlin is extremely relieved that she actually managed to complete the spell, and she is convinced that she successfully beat the wolf, but to her horror, the wolf runs right through the blast without suffering a single scratch and knocks her to the ground. It then slowly walks up to Merlin, but as it is about to eat her, the monster is suddenly struck down by a proper bolt of lightning. Merlin is overjoyed when she hears the crackle of lightning because she knows that means Eftel has come to save her. But that smile quickly fades once she sees how angry Eftel is since he had specifically warned her not to go into the forest. Merlin shrinks back with guilt and apologizes for her foolishness. Eftel begins lecturing Merlin on how she needs to stop trying to rush everything because power that isn't fully perfected before use cannot be called true power at all. He reminds her that even the most powerful magic becomes useless if the person casting it doesn't properly understand it. While Eftel is in the middle of his speech, the wolf monster suddenly gets back up and appears behind him, but Eftel doesn't even turn around to face it. He just casually tells it not to interrupt while he's in the middle of teaching his student a lesson, and then he proceeds to hit it with some level 10 magic, incinerating the wolf in an instant. A little while later, Eftel brings Merlin back home, and she still can't believe how amazing and awe-inspiring Eftel looked when he used that level 10 spell earlier. But Eftel tells her to hurry up and get to bed because she has had a long day. Merlin agrees, and she's about to go get ready for bed, but all of a sudden, Eftel falls to his knees and begins spitting up blood. Merlin rushes over to his side because she's worried about him, and Eftel apologizes for letting her see him like this since he knows she looks up to him. But Merlin reveals that she already knew about Eftel's sickness. She had noticed it a while ago, and that's why she was working so hard in hopes of becoming Eftel's successor so he won't have to put so much strain on himself. Eftel is ashamed to realize that his condition is what drove Merlin to become so reckless in the pursuit of power, but he tells her he doesn't have much time left, so he can't afford to waste a single minute resting. Merlin doesn't understand why Eftel is still so insistent on working even though he is so sick, so Eftel explains that he wants to be the one to teach the next generation of mages like Merlin and the other kids. There was once a time when Eftel wanted to become the strongest mage of all time, but he has already accepted that that's never going to happen, so he is doing his best to nurture the next generation. Merlin doesn't understand what Eftel means by that since he is clearly super strong, and Eftel is aware that he is indeed more powerful than most mages, but he stands no chance of ever reaching the top since the other emperors are all younger, stronger, and more talented than he is. The next morning, bright and early, one of Eftel's students comes knocking on his door to tell Eftel some really good news. Apparently, the Flame Emperor just published his research on a method to accurately discern a mage's magical aptitude. Eftel is shocked to hear this and snatches the paper to have a look for himself. And sure enough, the research paper does detail the perfect way to test a mage's aptitude. Eftel is impressed that the Flame Emperor was able to come up with something like this because it is a groundbreaking discovery, and Eftel really wants to try it out, so he calls for everyone to gather. A little while later, everyone meets in the lab to perform the aptitude test, and after preparing all the materials that the research said are required, Eftel decides to start by checking Merlin's aptitude. To do so, he places 4 strands of her hair in the 4 different test tubes, and after a little while, they all change color, with the blue and green test tubes shining especially brightly. According to the research, a glow this bright means Merlin possesses S-rank talent in both water and wind magic, which everyone thinks sounds about right for someone as talented as Merlin. As for the duller red and brown vials, they mean she has B and C-rank talent in earth and fire magic. While everyone else is talking about how cool this is, Eftel realizes that this test is indeed 100% accurate because it matches up perfectly with everything he has seen from Merlin's training since she was a baby. Currently, the only way for mages to discover their aptitude is to practice all forms of magic until eventually 1 or 2 forms surpass the rest. But with this method, it should be possible to appraise a mage's magical talent right from birth so they can optimize their training to become stronger than they otherwise would have been. Since this test seems to be the real deal, Eftel says he wants to try it next, and at first, Merlin doesn't see the point in doing so since they already know he is the Thunder Emperor. But Eftel wants to find out if he ever truly had what it takes to become the greatest. Over the years, he has had to work several times harder than everyone else just to keep up with them, and when the test is complete, Eftel finds out why. It's because he has absolutely no talent whatsoever. Eftel is left in utter shock because the vials remaining clear means that there isn't a single shred of magical talent in his body, and at first, Eftel completely rejects the result and assumes he must have made a mistake in the steps for the appraisal, but no matter how many times he tries it, the results remain the same. He is forced to come to terms with the fact that the reason he never reached the heights of the other emperors isn't because he simply didn't try hard enough. It was because he had been forsaken by the spirits altogether. The sense of betrayal he feels is so profound that he ends up suffering a heart attack and falls to the ground. Sometime later, Eftel has become bedridden as his condition worsens, and in his final moments, he is left cursing how unfair his life was because he kept hoping and believing that if he worked hard, he would be able to become the greatest mage of all time, but it turns out that his dream was doomed from the start. Shortly after, Eftel finally dies, but upon his death, his second reincarnation skill activates, and he is brought up to the heavenly realm to meet the goddess of reincarnation. Eftel had completely forgotten that he even had that skill in the first place, since he was first reincarnated into this world over 50 years ago, and now he kind of feels silly for crying on his deathbed a moment ago. The goddess of reincarnation welcomes Eftel back since it has been a long time since she last saw him, and she says she is very impressed with how far he managed to get in this life despite the fact that his body had no magical talent. But that aside, it's time for Eftel's second reincarnation. So the goddess asks him if he'd like her to grant him a cheat 2 times growth skill, so he won't have to suffer from a bottleneck next time. But Eftel says there's no need for that since he already has all the magical knowledge he will need to reach heights he never could in his past life. The goddess more or less expected that kind of answer from Eftel since that's the kind of guy he is, and since he is all set, she proceeds to reincarnate him into his new life. The next time Eftel opens his eyes, he finds himself in the body of a young boy who lives with his mother in the countryside. His life here is pretty normal, but now that he has recalled the memories from his past life, he immediately sneaks off to the shed, the first chance he gets to try out the aptitude appraisal method the Fire Emperor developed. He was hoping that in this life, he may finally get some good magical aptitudes so he can surpass his former self, but to his utter disappointment, he finds out that he also has 0 talent in this life as well, and he is really starting to regret turning down that cheat skill the goddess offered him now. With him being completely talentless yet again, he imagines he is going to end up bottlenecking after learning 10th level magic like he did in his last life. But just as he is in the middle of despairing over his mediocre fate, he suddenly notices a dragon flying overhead, and it looks like it's heading straight for the city. There's a group of knights trying to stop the dragon, so Eftel tries running after them to go help, but then he realizes that he's still a 4-year-old here. He probably could have taken that dragon down in an instant if he had been at his peak, but with this toddler body, there's no way he could cast his original 10th level magic. However, just as Eftel is thinking about his spell, his body suddenly begins to react, and the spell that he spent his entire last life developing is accidentally cast, striking the dragon down in one hit. The knights all gather around the fallen dragon, and they are really confused since they have no idea how the dragon was taken down, and honestly, so is Eftel since he never could have expected that he would retain the skills he gained at the peak of his past life in this new body. 3 years have passed since Eftel reincarnated into this body, and through studying, he has figured out that he is indeed still in the same world as before, but it is 400 years in the future from Eftel's past life. As for his current family, aside from his mother, he also technically has a father, but he has never seen him before. His father's name is apparently Duke Orkat, and he happens to be one of Eftel's descendants, so he was hoping he would get to meet him, but he hasn't had any such luck. His mother is one of Orkat's many mistresses, but she has no magical talent, and the other mistresses don't like her, since they think someone with no magical aptitude has no place in a mage family, so they sent her to live out in the middle of nowhere, and that essentially means that Eftel isn't recognized as a member of the family either. Fraser notices Eftel looking sad, so he apologizes for how he is being treated, and he says he would like to convince Orkat to change his mind, but so far, it hasn't been easy. Fraser treats Eftel as though he were his own little brother, but in reality, Fraser is only Eftel's half-brother since Fraser is actually the second son of Orkat's legitimate wife. He took pity on Eftel and his mother's situation and has been helping them out here and there for a while now, so Eftel has taken a liking to him and thinks Fraser is a good man. Fraser already dropped off some money to help them get by for the month, but he asks them if there's anything else they need before he leaves, and Eftel's mom thanks him for the consideration, but she says he has already done more than enough for them. This isn't exactly the ideal family situation for Eftel, but to be honest, he doesn't really care as long as he can keep studying magic. Fraser decides to stay for some tea with Eftel and his mom, and while he's there, he asks Eftel what he hopes to accomplish in the future, since he noticed that Eftel has been studying a lot lately. Eftel perks up when Fraser asks that question, so he's about to tell him that he wants to dedicate his life to studying magic, but his mom covers his mouth and tells Fraser that since Eftel has no magical aptitude like her, she was hoping Fraser would help him enroll in military school. Fraser seems delighted by the idea since he too went to military school and graduated top of his class in swordsmanship, so he thinks it will be perfect for Eftel. In fact, since he has some free time right now, he asks Eftel if he would like to go around back and practice some swordsmanship in the meantime, and before Eftel gets the chance to respond, his mom says she'd love that. A little while later, Eftel is out in the backyard with Fraser, and Fraser is running him through some basic swordsmanship drills. Eftel is going along with it for now since he can see how excited Fraser is that he's going to military school like him. And he is sure part of it is because Fraser is being considerate of Eftel's lack of magical talent, but Eftel is sure of what he wants, so he tells Fraser he wants to study magic. Fraser looks at Eftel with pity in his eyes because he thinks he's just being delusional, and he tries to explain to him that there's no shame in accepting that there are some things you just aren't good at. But Eftel insists that he wants to go to the Magic Academy no matter what, so Fraser proposes a challenge. He tells Eftel he is going to cast a spell, and if Eftel manages to replicate it, he will be allowed to attend the Magic Academy. Eftel is excited since this seems like an easy test to him, but internally, Fraser is feeling guilty about doing something so cruel to Eftel because he believes there's no way Eftel could ever cast magic. So this is his way of getting Eftel to realize that there's no way he can study magic without any magical aptitude. Fraser begins casting a wind spell, but to Eftel's confusion, he sees Fraser using a chant and doing some weird dance to cast the spell. By the time Fraser is done, he casts a wind slash that cleaves a tree right down the trunk, and he is impressed with himself because casting a spell like that takes a lot of effort. He assumed Eftel would be left in awe after seeing his performance, but Eftel doesn't seem impressed at all. He then proceeds to wave his hand and cast a wind spell of his own. Only, Eftel's spell is much stronger than Fraser's and casually clears a large section of the forest. For a second, Eftel is worried he messed up because Fraser asked him to replicate the spell he cast, and while Fraser's spell was only level 2, Eftel got carried away and made his spell level 4. Fraser is left absolutely speechless when he hears that what Eftel just used was level 4 magic because, in this day and age, level 4 spells are seen as advanced magic, and he doesn't understand how a 7-year-old like Eftel was able to learn something like that. Eftel is a little confused by what Fraser just said because he clearly remembers level 4 magic being classified as low-level magic back in his day, and he can still go all the way up to level 10, so there must be something wrong here. Hearing Eftel say he can use level 10 magic is too much for Fraser's brain to process, so he ends up passing out, and judging by his reaction, Eftel is starting to wonder what this era's magic is really like. He takes Fraser up to his room so he can rest, and while he's there, he starts reading some books to figure out where this world stands in terms of magic. It turns out that, for some unknown reason, magic has severely declined over the past 400 years, to the point that something as basic as incantationless spell casting is basically a lost art. A few moments later, Fraser wakes up, and he's still freaking out about Eftel being able to use such strong magic, but Eftel manages to gaslight him into thinking that when he cast his spells, he destroyed the tree and accidentally had a piece of wood fly into his head out of nowhere and knock him out, so everything he thought he saw must have been a hallucination. The reason Eftel went through all the trouble of convincing Fraser that he must have been hallucinating is that if the magic of this world really is of such a low level, he would cause a national incident if he were to reveal his power. So he decides to keep it hidden for now and study magic in secret while pretending to agree to go to military school. Or at least, that was the plan at first, but during training, Eftel kept getting beaten by Fraser so many times that it infuriated him, and he began genuinely wanting to improve at swordsmanship just so he could get back at Fraser. By the age of 10, Eftel had fully embraced swordsmanship, and his skills had gotten to the point that he could now dice up a log mid-air with nothing but a wooden sword. Sure, magic is cool, but using a sword is pretty fun too. And now that he thinks about it, becoming a magic swordsman is an option, so he can just train both at the same time. A little while later, Fraser shows up looking for Eftel because it's time for their usual training session, and Eftel says he will be right there. But it turns out that Fraser happened to have something special planned for today's training session. He says he brought a guest instructor along today, and as he says this, Eftel notices that it got really dark around him all of a sudden. He then turns around to find an absolute mountain of a man standing behind him, and he is startled at first because he wasn't expecting to see someone like him. But Fraser introduces him as Moria and explains to Eftel that he is going to be his special sword instructor. Moria is the retired captain of the Knights, so he is incredibly skilled with a sword, and he wants to go up against Eftel since Fraser has been bragging about him non-stop. He tells Eftel to attack him any way he wants, and he even turns his back to make it easy for him. But Eftel can tell that there isn't a single opening on Moria, so he doesn't dare to move. Moria gets bored of waiting for Eftel to make the first move, so he decides to strike first, and Eftel just barely manages to evade the strike. But Moria isn't impressed so far because any novice swordsman could have done that. Eftel knows there's no way he's going to be able to contend with someone like Moria in terms of strength with his current body, so he casts physical enhancement on himself. And Moria is actually impressed to see him do this because it's an advanced skill for someone as young as him. This is one of the reasons Fraser thought Eftel was so special, because despite the fact that, as far as Fraser knows, Eftel is incapable of using magic, he noticed that Eftel has quite a bit of mana in his body, and he can control it just as well as any mage can, which is why he is able to use physical enhancement so effortlessly. Eftel may be struggling against Moria right now, but in truth, if he wanted to, he could have taken Moria out immediately by using magic. But he's trying to keep his magic a secret, and besides, he doesn't want to win like that. He wants to win through the merit of his martial arts skills. He charges back in against Moria, but Moria counters with a heavy slash, and though Eftel manages to block it, he is still being pushed down under the weight of the slash. Moria thinks this is checkmate since, even with the physical enhancement, Eftel isn't strong enough to overpower him in a head-on confrontation. But to his surprise, mid-clash, Eftel suddenly swings his sword to the side, causing Moria to slip forward, and Eftel then proceeds to use Moria's momentum against him to judo throw him to the ground. Moria can hardly believe what just happened, but he is man enough to admit when he lost fair and square, so he congratulates Eftel on his victory and tells him he passed the test. Eftel doesn't know what he's talking about since he thought this was just a regular friendly sparring match. But Fraser explains that he actually brought Moria here to test him, because Moria is the headmaster of the military school, and since Eftel managed to beat him, he has earned himself guaranteed admission. That said, he's going to have to wait until he turns 15 to attend. Some time goes by, and Fraser is over at Eftel's house again when a big thunderstorm rolls in. He thinks it looks pretty bad out there, so he asks Eftel's mom where Eftel is, and she tells him that Eftel is still out there training, and that he probably isn't going to return since he never comes back early, even when the weather is bad like this. Meanwhile, on Eftel's end, he is out in the forest practicing his level 10 spells, and he is a little frustrated since he is a little slower in terms of casting time than he'd like to be. So he still has a lot of work ahead of him. And he loves rainy days like this because it gives him the opportunity to train his magic without drawing suspicion, since everyone will just assume it was a regular thunderbolt. However, he failed to account for the possibility that someone might come looking for him because a moment later, Fraser comes running up to him, and he is terrified because he just saw that terrifying bolt of lightning strike near Eftel. He asks him if he's okay, and Eftel says he is fine, but Fraser begins lecturing him on how important it is to make sure he doesn't get hurt because he will be enrolling in the military school next year. Hearing Fraser talk about military school reminds Eftel that he doesn't have much time left, and though he hasn't discussed this with his mom or Fraser, he has decided that he can't go to military school. He understands that with magic aptitude tests being common, it will be hard for him to get into the magic academy, but he still wants to give it a try. But he doesn't know how to explain that to Fraser and his mom, so he has decided to leave home right before he's set to join the military school. But just as he was thinking this, Fraser suddenly said he had some good news for Eftel because, after hearing of how skilled Eftel was with a sword, his father finally decided that he wants to see him. Eftel personally didn't really want to meet his father at this point since he had already been ignored for 14 years, so whatever relationship he had hoped to cultivate was already dead. But he can see how happy his mom and Fraser are about it, and he doesn't want to make them sad, so he agrees to the meeting. However, he soon comes to regret that decision because he finds out that his father is an absolute jerk. He never once stopped thinking of Eftel as a failure, and the only reason he called him here was to tell him that he will no longer be paying any child support for Eftel, since he got a scholarship to the military school. And while he's here, he also asks one of his other sons to have a sparring match with Eftel, intending to have him injured just because he doesn't like him. They all head outside as the duel is set to commence, but before they get started, Fraser warns Eftel that even though this is meant to be a mock battle, he still needs to be careful because Joachim over there is actually very skilled, and he's unbearably ruthless as well, so Fraser tells Eftel that if he feels like he can't win, he should immediately surrender to avoid getting hurt. Eftel thanks Fraser for the warning and steps into the ring with Joachim, and Joachim is actually quite surprised that Eftel didn't run away, but Eftel says he has no intention of doing that. Joachim then throws a sword towards Eftel for him to use in the duel, but as Eftel catches it, he realizes that it's a lot heavier than the practiced swords he's used to. Joachim laughs and says these swords are made from a special hardwood, and they are heavy enough that a solid strike from one of these could easily break a bone or cave your skull in. He obviously said that intending to intimidate Eftel, but he isn't fazed at all, and that pisses Joachim off, so he starts insulting Eftel and his mother in very colorful language, and Eftel can handle insults directed towards him, but he refuses to tolerate such disrespect aimed at his mother, and he is truly ashamed that such scumbags as Joachim and his father came from his bloodline. The rage coming from him is so intense that even Joachim feels like something is different about him, and as the duel begins, Eftel immediately charges at Joachim, aiming straight for his head. Joachim just barely manages to dodge by dumb luck, and Eftel is surprised he actually got so close to hitting him since, with how the others were hyping Joachim up, he expected him to put up more of a fight. Eftel throws out a few more strikes to test the extent of Joachim's limits, and Joachim is really struggling out here. He just barely manages to block Eftel's final strike, but everything Eftel just did was without using his physical enhancement magic. So once he activates physical enhancement, he effortlessly pushes his sword into Joachim's face and knocks him to the ground. And while Joachim is lying there battered and bruised in disbelief, Eftel warns him that if he ever insults his mother again, he will be killed for it, and he's not joking about this in the slightest. Anyway, now that the duel is over, Eftel says there's nothing more for them to do here, so he asks his mom if she's ready to leave yet. Eftel's mother is a little shocked by everything that just happened since she is having a hard time believing that her son is really this strong, but she's still incredibly proud of him all the same. After that, things pretty much go back to normal, and Eftel is honestly surprised by how quiet everything has been since he fully expects his father to pull something in an attempt to get back at him for what happened the other day, but so far, nothing has happened. Just then, there's a loud banging on the door, so Eftel and his mom go to answer it, and they are shocked to see Moria and Fraser standing there with a baby in their arms. They ask what's going on and why they have a baby with them, so Fraser explains that it's a really long story. They had recently been making efforts to strengthen security around the capital, since, according to the intel they received, someone was planning to assassinate the prince. However, just then, one of the knights ran in to inform everyone that barbarians had made it into the city, so they were already too late. It was clear that the barbarians' goal was ultimately to kill the prince, so Moria and Fraser grabbed the prince and ran away to the safest location they could think of, which was here. The reason the prince is being targeted in the first place is because the previous king of this nation had 2 sons, and although tradition usually calls for the eldest son to inherit the throne, since the second son was much more talented at the time, the second son became the current king, and the eldest son became the crown minister. Up until recently, the second son didn't have any male heirs to succeed him as king, so for a long time, it had looked like the first son's son would become the next king. But as luck would have it, the second son eventually managed to have a son. And now the first son wants to take out the second son's son so his own son can take over as king. That's a lot of sons. Basically, the minister wants the current king's son dead, so he is planning to kill him. And Fraser has reason to believe that their father has something to do with it because he stands to benefit the most if the minister's son were to become king. There's no way they can take the prince back to the capital under these conditions, so Fraser plans to cross the border and go as far away as possible to make sure the prince stays safe. The following morning, both Moria and Fraser prepare to head for the border with the prince, but before they leave, Eftel suddenly comes out in full gear and says he wants to go along as well. Eftel's mother is shocked to hear him say this, but Moria is actually glad Eftel wants to come because they'll need all the help they can get. Eftel normally wouldn't feel the need to get personally involved in a situation like this, but he recalls how well the king of this nation treated him back in his past life. So he wants to repay that kindness by looking after his descendants for him, especially since his father is apparently contributing to the assassination plot. So he says goodbye to his mother for now, and they all start heading towards the border together. As Eftel and the others are making their way through the woods, they suddenly hear a loud crashing sound nearby, almost like thunder, and they aren't sure what it is, but they know it can't be good. So they pick up the pace in an attempt to escape before the enemy catches up to them. However, to their horror, just as they are about to make it out of the forest, Fraser spots an entire army of mages posted out there waiting for them. And the army in question is none other than Eftel's father's personal mage division. Orcott had expected Fraser and the others to try and escape the kingdom with the prince in this direction, so he set up a blockade to stop them. Fraser and Moria think they should just turn around and find another way to get past the border, but unfortunately for them, the crashing sound they heard earlier was a spell from Orcott's mage division, and they used that spell to set a large portion of the forest on fire, so there's nowhere for them to run. They also can't just stay here since, as time goes on, the fire will spread more and more until it forces them out of the forest and into Orcott's hands, so they need to figure out a plan of action fast. Fraser thinks it would be a good idea for him to head out there by himself and talk to Orcott since, as Orcott's son, there's no way he would attack him on sight, and he might even be willing to listen to reason. Moria and Eftel don't think that's a good idea, and they tell Fraser as much, but Fraser is convinced that his dad isn't a bad guy deep down, so he decides to go ahead with the negotiation. He walks out of the forest with his arms up to show that he isn't armed, and he asks to speak with Orcott. He tells him that it's not too late for him to stop all this and abandon the assassination plot so they can all go back to the capital together, and when Orcott hears Fraser say this, he decides to go down to meet him face to face. Fraser is happy because he assumes this must mean that Orcott understands what he's saying and is willing to give up on the assassination, but in reality, Orcott just wanted to get close to Fraser so he could use a lightning magic device to shock him unconscious. And while Fraser is out cold on the ground, Orcott then orders his mages to combine their magic in the special magic machine to cast a level 6 lightning spell right on top of Fraser's body, which seems like overkill when you consider the fact that level 6 magic is the strongest magic they have. Unfortunately, Eftel was too far away to save Fraser, and he can't believe Orcott would so casually kill his son in cold blood all so he could kill a baby for a stupid power struggle. He had intended to just pretend Orcott didn't exist and live his life while avoiding him before this, but now, Eftel has decided that Orcott and everyone associated with him are nothing but scummy roaches and must be exterminated before they cause any more harm. He walks out onto the battlefield to settle this once and for all, and the first thing he does is cast a level 9 ice spell to put out all the flames. Orcott and his men are in utter shock when they see Eftel do this because they have never seen level 9 magic before, let alone seen someone cast it so easily by themselves. Orcott yells at his men to attack Eftel immediately, so they all prepare their level 5 explosive arrow spells and fire at Eftel, but to their shock, he remains standing completely unharmed even though it was a direct hit. Eftel is disappointed by the shocked look on their faces because it means they have no idea about constantly active shield magic either, and if that's the case, then the magic of this era really has faltered more than he thought. Orcott can't believe Eftel really managed to survive that, but he refuses to give up, so he orders his mages to prepare another level 6 spell for Eftel, but as they do so, Eftel barely needs to raise a finger to completely nullify the spell, and since level 6 magic is the strongest spell they have, seeing him nullify it so easily completely shatters the morale of the soldiers. Eftel then dashes right into the middle of the enemy formation and begins slicing into them one after another. He hasn't really had a chance to test this out on other people before, but this is the perfect opportunity, so he coats his sword in magic energy and tries using it to cast a level 2 spell at one of the mages, and it is really effective because it ends up vaporizing the dude. After seeing Eftel kill so many mages with so little effort, the remaining mages are terrified and all try to run for their lives, but Eftel has no intention of letting any of them survive. So he raises his arm and prepares to show them what real legendary magic looks like before, casting a level 10 lightning spell. After Eftel's spell hits the ground, every single member of Orcott's army is reduced to ash, and the only ones left are Orcott and Joachim, not because they are strong or anything, but because Eftel intentionally put up a shield around them to make sure they didn't die. Of course, this doesn't mean he intends to spare their lives, and in fact, it's quite the opposite, because he just thought a quick and painless death here would be too easy for people as despicable as these two, so he plans to take them back to the capital so they can face justice for their crimes, and considering the fact that their crime is attempting to assassinate a prince, Eftel knows it won't go well for them. Just as expected, after Orcott and Joachim are handed over to the authorities, they are tortured and later publicly executed for their crimes. So Eftel won't need to worry about them causing any more trouble, and as for Fraser, he actually managed to survive the attack, and it was all thanks to a special magic necklace that had been passed down in the family for generations. Eftel recalls that that necklace used to belong to him in his past life, and he is glad it managed to save Fraser's life in the end. There had been talks of stripping Orcott of his duke title after his death due to the nature of his crimes, but since Fraser had risked his life trying to protect the prince, it was instead decided that Fraser would take over the family estate and become its new head. As for Eftel, he decided to finally spill the beans about his true magic capabilities to Fraser and Moria, since they deserve to know the truth, but he still keeps the part about him being reincarnated a secret. They are both left absolutely speechless when they see what Eftel can do, and Eftel apologizes for not telling them about it sooner, but they both say it's not a problem, since they understand why he wouldn't want to reveal this kind of power. If people found out that he could do this kind of thing, it would cause absolute chaos. They ask Eftel what he plans to do now, so he informs them that he wants to go to magic school. They are both surprised that he'd choose to go to magic school even though he is already so strong, but Eftel says he wants to grow even stronger than he already is, and the two of them are willing to support him all the way. The time has finally come for Eftel to leave home so he can go to the Magic Academy, and his mother, Moria, and Fraser are all saying their heartfelt goodbyes. But Eftel's mother is especially upset to see him go since she's going to miss him a lot. However, Eftel is officially an adult now, so he is free to go wherever he chooses and do whatever he wants, but she reminds Eftel that no matter what, he will always be welcome back home with her. And Eftel is sincerely grateful to her for raising him these past 15 years. Sometime after leaving, Eftel has covered a good amount of distance, so he is ready to take a break now, and there just so happens to be a tea house nearby, so he decides to head in. While he's having his tea, he overhears an old man nearby glazing the heck out of this flashily dressed mage because his name is Edward, and he is apparently a famous fire mage around here. The old man is excited that someone as powerful as Edward is here to teach this far out in the countryside, since this is a rare opportunity for them. But Edward is offended that the old man would dare to interrupt him in the middle of his reading time. So Edward reminds him that, as an A-rank adventurer, 1 second of his time is infinitely more valuable than that of a 50-year-old man like him who is still stuck at C rank. The old man begins begging and apologizing to Edward for being so rude as to waste his time, but he says the reason he came was to inform Edward that the villagers here had prepared a feast to celebrate his arrival. However, Edward immediately rejects the invitation because he has other plans in mind for tonight. He explains that the slave crest on the slave he bought is about to be fully set tonight, and before now, he wasn't allowed to crack because it would have messed up the seal, but once the seal is set, even the world's strongest wouldn't be able to pull him out. Ethel overhears all of this and is absolutely disgusted, but that girl is a demon, and buying demons as sex slaves isn't illegal. In fact, he feels a little guilty recalling all this, because after he destroyed the demons in the war, Merlin probably would have ended up as a slave if he hadn't taken her in on a whim. Just then, a man runs into the tent to warn everyone that a giant orc has just appeared, and just outside the tent, they all see the orc chowing down on a cart full of pumpkins. And the villagers all begin panicking when they see that thing because no adventurer in the countryside is strong enough to handle a monster like that. The villagers are all absolutely terrified, but the old man tells them they have nothing to fear because, luckily for them, they have the A-rank adventurer Edward with them today. Everyone instantly feels a sense of relief once they realize there's an A-rank adventurer here, and Edward is loving all the attention he's getting. So he tells them all that he's going to show them what real magic looks like by dealing with this lower life form. He then takes out his wand and prepares to cast his attack spell, hitting the orc with some level 4 fire magic, which he believes to be more than enough to take down a giant orc since it is only a B-rank monster. However, just when he turns around expecting a round of applause for his performance, Edward is met with a look of worry from the crowd because he hadn't actually defeated the monster like he thought he had. In fact, he didn't manage to do any damage to it at all because the orc emerges from the flames completely unharmed. Edward can't believe what he is seeing because the level 4 fire spell is the most powerful magic he has at his disposal, and he knows for a fact that it should be able to take down any giant orc, but upon closer inspection, he realizes that what he's up against isn't an ordinary giant orc, but rather a berserk orc, the most powerful of the orc species, and Edward realizes that his fire magic isn't capable of harming this thing no matter how many times he attacks, so there's no way he can win. With no chance of victory, Edward immediately starts running away, and it's hard to fault him for that, but then he does the bitch move of casting a shield around the unsuspecting villagers to trap them inside with the orc in order to buy himself time to escape while the orc is busy eating all of them. Ethel is absolutely disgusted by this behavior, and he had initially hoped that Edward would be able to handle the monster since he doesn't want to draw too much attention to himself. But given the situation, he can't afford to let this go on any longer. He immediately casts a level 6 dispel to destroy the barrier, and Edward is extremely shocked because he can't believe that a kid actually managed to shatter his barrier without even using an incantation. The people are also really impressed with Eftel's magic, and Eftel realizes that he should probably avoid showing off any more than this. So he decides to hide the fact that he can use high-level magic by casting a level 3 spell as cover, and then, while everyone is distracted, he will use a level 9 spell to take out the orc monster. However, after Eftel casts the level 3 spell, to his surprise, the orc begins burning to the ground, and he's a little confused since he didn't think a level 3 spell would be enough to do the job. Edward also can't believe this since his level 4 spell did no damage to that monster, so how could Eftel's level 3 spell kill it so easily? The old man explains that, from what he saw, even though Eftel is only around 15, his magic is a lot more refined than Edward's, so even a level 3 spell was able to hit with the power of a level 5 spell. Eftel can't believe someone who is so proud of their A-rank title like Edward never bothered to learn how to properly refine his magic, and now that Eftel thinks about it, a level 1 spell probably could have done the job here. Just then, Eftel realizes that all the people have gathered around him, and he is worried that they might have caught on to the fact that he can use extremely powerful magic, but from their perspective, it looked like Eftel just used an ordinary level 3 spell. So what they are really excited about is the orc meat that is currently on fire since they might be able to eat it, and since they don't seem to be paying attention to him, Eftel decides to use the opportunity to leave. However, before he does, he has a few things he'd like to say to Edward. First of all, he tells him he should respect his elders more because the old man knows a lot more about the proper way to use magic than Edward does, and more seriously, he tells Edward that what he did back there was attempted murder. Thanks to Eftel's intervention, no one actually died, but he makes it clear that that is still a crime, and criminals have no right to own slaves, so he orders Edward to release the demon slave immediately, and then turn himself into the authorities, and Edward has no choice but to agree since he knows Eftel far outclasses him in strength. After that, Eftel continues on his journey to the academy, but after walking for a while, he realizes that the demon girl has been following him. He asks her if there's anything she needs from him, so she nervously pops out from behind a rock and begs Eftel to become her master because, while she's grateful to him for setting her free, at this rate, she'll end up getting arrested as an escaped slave in no time. Eftel realizes that she's right since the slave crest isn't easily removed, and although she may not have a master right now, with the crest on her, anyone would be able to claim her as their slave, and if she ends up with someone even worse than Edward, she'd be in real trouble. She figured that since Eftel seems like a nice person, he'd be her best bet, and Eftel agrees that she's probably right about that, but he wonders how she even ended up as a slave in the first place. Anastasia explains that she is part of a clan that has been enslaved ever since the demons were defeated during the war, and although demons aren't outright ostracized anymore, since their clan was already enslaved, they have remained slaves for the past 100 years. She tells Eftel that he won't regret becoming her master because, although she may not look like it, she is actually a descendant of the demon royal family, and she is loosely related to the great mage Merlin. But when Eftel hears the name Merlin, he cuts Anastasia off and asks her to repeat herself. Anastasia reiterates that she is technically related to Merlin, the strongest demon and the current headmaster of the Magic Academy, and Eftel begins to shed tears of joy when he realizes that Merlin is still alive and has made a name for herself as the strongest demon and head of the Magic Academy. He can't wait to see Merlin again, and since Anastasia is one of Merlin's relatives, he can't let her suffer either. So he agrees to become her master temporarily and brings her to the next town with him. Once they arrive, Anastasia asks Eftel what he intends to do here. So Eftel explains that he plans to participate in the Academy's entrance exam, which is going to be held tomorrow. Anastasia is surprised to hear that Eftel actually intends to apply as a student since she thinks he is already way too strong for the Academy, but Eftel has his reasons for wanting to go. He says the first thing they should do is find an inn to stay at, but then he hears Anastasia's stomach grumble, so he decides to go get some food with her first. He takes Anastasia to a restaurant in town, and Anastasia is a little hesitant to go in since this place looks expensive, but Eftel tells her she doesn't have to worry because he can afford it. As they walk in, the wait staff are a little surprised to see someone come in with a slave, but they still act respectful and lead Eftel over to a table for two. However, the rest of the guests aren't as discreet because the second they see Anastasia, they make their disdain toward a slave like her abundantly clear. Anastasia is starting to feel self-conscious because she thinks she doesn't belong here, but Eftel assures her that everything is perfectly fine and goes to take a seat. He had expected Anastasia to take the seat across from him, but to his surprise, he finds her sitting on the floor instead, and when he asks her what she's doing, she explains that all slaves are supposed to kneel next to their master when he's eating, so they can attend to his needs more efficiently. However, Eftel tells her she doesn't need to do that with him, and orders her to get up and have a seat at the table. Anastasia is delighted since she has never had such a comfy seat before, but all of a sudden, the manager of the restaurant comes over and tells Eftel that this establishment is strictly for the upper class, and they have a policy against allowing slaves to use the chairs. He even begins questioning whether Eftel has enough money to afford the food there, and Eftel can see where this is going. So to shut the manager up, he takes out 3 dragon drops. The manager's eyes go wide when he sees them because each one is worth well over 500 gold coins. He immediately apologizes for questioning Eftel and orders the staff to take Eftel and his guests to the VIP room, where a massive feast is prepared for them. The next day, the Academy's entrance exam is about to begin, so Eftel is trying to figure out where he's supposed to register. But before he walks off, Anastasia stops him to say thank you for the new clothes he bought her. Eftel is glad she likes them so much, and since she's here anyway, he suggests that she should take the entrance exam with him. After all, anyone is allowed to apply, and if things go well for her, she might be able to get a good job down the line since Magic Academy graduates are highly sought after. Anastasia agrees to take the test, but she isn't confident that she'll be able to pass. However, Eftel knows for a fact that she'll be fine since he can see that she has a lot more magical potential than most people. They both register together and head to the first exam site, and as the exam finally begins, they are informed that the first test is going to be a battle royale. The only rules are that the students are to keep fighting until only 5 of them remain inside the ring. As the exam proctor, Frank admits that he really loves jobs like this since he gets paid to basically do nothing but watch a bunch of kids fight, though it does get pretty boring for him since he rarely sees any promising rookies nowadays. He looks down at the field and sees that Anastasia and Eftel have both been surrounded by the other examinees, and he recognizes this as a common occurrence since, after the exam begins, people often target the people they think look weak. However, a moment later, every single one of those students gets sent flying by Eftel after he uses a physically enhanced kick on them. The instructor is actually quite impressed that Eftel is able to use body strengthening of this degree at such a young age, but he says it's not over yet because, in a battle royale, when you prove yourself to be stronger, you will inevitably draw the attention of even more people who will team up to try to eliminate you. Sure enough, Eftel and Anastasia are surrounded again, but Eftel doesn't seem too worried about it and asks Anastasia to handle it, so she begins casting a level 3 wind spell, which blows the 16 people surrounding them out of the ring in one go. The students can't believe what just happened since there's no way a new student should be able to use level 3 magic like that, but there are no rules against using magic in this test. Anastasia is starting to wonder if she might have gone a little overboard with her spell, but Eftel tells her she did a good job and that he was right about her having good magical talent. However, he asks if she really needs to say the entire incantation every time she casts a spell, and everyone around laughs when they hear Eftel say this because it's basic knowledge that spells can't be used without a proper incantation, but Eftel tells them it's not that hard to skip the incantation if you really put some effort into it, and to demonstrate, he proceeds to multicast a level 4 wind spell right there, creating such a powerful wind current that, by the time it's all said and done, everyone except Eftel and Anastasia has been knocked out of the arena. It goes without saying that Eftel and Anastasia passed this section of the test, so from there, it's time for them to move on to the written portion. For Eftel, since he spent almost the entirety of his past life studying magic, none of these questions are particularly challenging for him to answer, but he's surprised that there are so many questions in the first place because it's going to take him forever to answer all of them. By the time the test is over, Eftel just barely manages to finish all the questions, so he is relieved, but Anastasia is shocked to learn that he actually answered all the questions since, with the written test, you're only supposed to answer questions that relate to your best field. Eftel can't believe he went through all that stress for no reason, and a little while later, once the tests have been graded, the dean of the academy is informed that one of the candidates managed to get a score of 948, which is unheard of since the test scores are usually in the low hundreds. The dean seems convinced that Eftel must have cheated somehow, but just then, France walks in and informs the dean that he recalls seeing Eftel during the practical test, and the kid was able to parallel cast 4 level 4 spells at once, so he probably earned that written score fair and square as well. The dean is shocked to learn that Eftel really managed to pull something like that off because most students here aren't able to cast level 4 spells until after they graduate, and not even the professors here are capable of such a feat. So the dean is starting to wonder if Eftel might be the second coming of the legendary Thunder Mage he shares a name with. Later on, the results of the entrance exam are posted outside, and everyone gathers to look for their name on the list. Anastasia soon finds her name, and she is excited to tell Eftel that she managed to get into the special class, but she got so excited that she ended up hugging Eftel out of nowhere, which was embarrassing since they were out in public. After calming down, Eftel goes back to looking for his name on the list, but to his utter shock, he finds out that his name isn't there at all. Anastasia can't believe this since there should be no way Eftel failed if she passed the test, and Eftel is just as confused as she is because he knows he did well, but he starts wondering if they might have performed a magical aptitude test on him at some point and figured out that he has no magical talent. Anastasia immediately decides to head to the dean's office to complain because this is seriously unfair. But just then, she notices a golden plaque to the side of the main list, and on it, Eftel's name is listed as the elite special student, so it turns out that he really did get in after all. Eftel is glad he didn't fail the exam, but he can't help but worry a little because he has no idea what elite special student is supposed to mean. After doing a little research, Anastasia finds out that the elite special student receives a ton of perks like free tuition, free room and board, free food, and a monthly stipend for expenses as well. But then Eftel reads the fine print and finds out that, in exchange for all of these perks, he'd need to participate in all sorts of events and activities on behalf of the school. It sounds good, but it would basically make him the school's mascot. And that's the exact opposite of the school life he was hoping for, since he just wants to be able to quietly research magic enough to figure out how to get past his bottleneck. However, he gets the feeling that, since he has already been chosen as the elite special student representative, he doesn't have much of a choice anymore. Just then, as he and Anastasia are walking through the halls, Eftel suddenly notices a familiar face talking with a few of the professors. And there's no mistaking it because he's sure that the woman over there is Merlin. He immediately hides because, although he's happy to see Merlin again, it would draw way too much attention to him if Merlin were to recognize him and start calling him master out of surprise. And with how much time he had spent with Merlin in his past life, he's sure she'd be able to figure out who he really is at a glance. So he decides to sneak away for now and reveal himself to Merlin later when there aren't so many other people around. Eftel then grabs Anastasia and starts walking away, but even without seeing him, Merlin can sense Eftel's familiar presence and immediately turns around to see if he is there. By then, Eftel has already turned the corner, so she laughs at herself for thinking someone who died 400 years ago would just randomly show up out of nowhere. But then she sees Eftel on the other side of the corridor, and she can tell that there are some similarities between him and the Eftel she knew, so she runs up and gets in front of him because she wants to talk. First of all, she asks Eftel if he has any relation to the legendary lightning mage, and Eftel would like to tell her the truth right now, but there are still way too many people around, so he makes up an excuse and runs off with Anastasia to avoid the question. A little while later, Eftel and Anastasia are out in the park having lunch, and when Eftel asks Anna what she thought of Merlin, he's surprised to learn that Anna didn't recognize Merlin at all. In truth, though Anna had said she was a relative of Merlin's, she was exaggerating a little, since they just have common ancestors from 10 generations back, which barely counts as being related. That explains why Anna doesn't really look like Merlin, but Eftel still wonders what Merlin is doing here, since he thought she was the headmistress of an entirely different magic academy. It turns out that Merlin is here because she was asked to come as a special guest to welcome the new students at this academy. Eftel is glad that Merlin isn't actually a teacher here, since he doesn't know how he would avoid her if that were the case. But he's thinking that he should probably tell her about the whole reincarnation situation before things get out of hand. However, just then he gets called on stage to give a speech since he's the elite special student representative, and as a result, Merlin learns Eftel's full name. So now she's even more suspicious of him than she was before. Later on, Eftel is sitting at a table during lunch, and a bunch of girls from his class are crowding around him because they all think it's cool that he's an elite special student, but all of a sudden, Merlin walks up to Eftel's table and slams a stack of papers down because she's onto him. The other girls are intimidated by Merlin and leave, so Merlin sits down across from Eftel and asks him if he's familiar with the concept of reincarnation. Eftel is surprised that Merlin was able to figure it out so quickly, but then again, he recalls that she had always been rather clever, so it's not that surprising. He tries to play it off as some sort of joke, but Merlin is dead serious because she took a look at Eftel's exam papers, and aside from his incredibly high score, she realized that every answer Eftel provided used magic theory from 400 years ago instead of modern-day magic theory. Eftel realizes he messed up because he failed to account for the difference in time period when answering his test, but Merlin suddenly apologizes for getting so heated and tells him he doesn't have to explain. She just got so worked up when the thought of her old master came up, but she now realizes that claiming Eftel as the reincarnation of her master is a bit of a stretch. That said, she is still convinced that Eftel must have some kind of special connection to her master, otherwise, he wouldn't have run away from her back then. Eftel really wants to tell Merlin that he actually is the reincarnation of her master, but there are way too many people watching right now, so instead, he comes up with a safer option and whispers into Merlin's ear, telling her that he is a long-lost descendant of the Lightning Emperor. Merlin can't believe it since she was never informed of anything like that, but Eftel says the Lightning Emperor deliberately kept it a secret and taught his illegitimate son all the secrets of magic he had learned at the time, and over the years, those secrets were passed down in his family until they reached Eftel. Merlin still finds this hard to believe, so to convince her, Eftel mentions the fact that the Lightning Emperor died in despair after finding out that he had no magical aptitude. But Merlin shuts him up because she went to great lengths to keep that a secret since if people found out, it would damage the Lightning Emperor's reputation. She tells Eftel he can't let anyone else find out about that, but the fact that he knows about it is proof enough for her to believe that he really is a hidden descendant of the Lightning Emperor. She is a little hurt by the idea that her master didn't tell her about something so important, but she accepts it and tells Eftel that she'd like to see what he's made of. So she challenges him to face her during the mock duels today since she too has been practicing everything her master taught her, and she thinks Eftel would be a worthy opponent. Eftel doesn't like the sound of that since, if he were to fight someone as famous as Merlin, it would surely draw a lot of attention to him, and attention is the last thing he wants right now. He knows he could simply reject her request, but a part of him also wants to see what his student has managed to accomplish in the last 400 years, so he agrees to face Merlin in the mock duels. The event was originally created so students and teachers could face each other in battle as a way to demonstrate the difference in strength between them. No student is ever really expected to win, but with everything Ethel has done till now, he has a large chunk of the student body, most of whom are his fangirls, convinced that he might actually be able to pull it off. As the match is set to begin, Ethel suggests to Merlin that they should start things off slow with a little test of their abilities, and Merlin agrees, so she tells Ethel he can go first. Ethel then runs forward and launches a level 6 fire spell at her, and Merlin is caught off guard since she never expected him to be able to use magic of this level without an incantation. Merlin is completely engulfed in flames, and everyone in the stands is horrified because it looks like Ethel just incinerated her. But from within the flames, Merlin chuckles and apologizes to Ethel because it looks like she underestimated him. She then reveals that she managed to block his fireball with a level 7 perfect wall defense spell, and Ethel is truly proud of how far Merlin has come since he last saw her. Merlin is also quite impressed that someone as young as Ethel could unleash magic of such great strength, but she's not going to back down so easily, so she prepares to fire back with her own level 6 fire spell. Ethel smiles as the fireball closes in on him, because this is the first time he has gotten to experience going against someone who knows how to cast real magic since he reincarnated, so he's having a lot of fun here. He decides to use the same defense spell Merlin used to block the fireball, but Merlin takes offense to the fact that Ethel is smiling while he fights her. So she flies into the air and prepares to launch yet another fire spell. As the flames crash into Ethel's shield again, the crowd gasps in horror because there's no way his shield could survive 2 of those strikes back to back, and as Merlin lands, she gloats, telling Ethel that normally, it takes a while for a mage to finish casting a second spell after using a powerful one. But when you truly master the teachings of Ethel, you are able to cast high-level spells with almost no cooldown. She thought she had finally one-upped Ethel, but from within the flames, Ethel tells her he is already aware of that technique, and in fact, he's using it right now. He then activates a level 7 frost spell to counteract Merlin's flames, which comes as a shock to her, since not only would Ethel have had to cast it immediately after his level 7 shield, he would also have needed to predict that she'd use a fire spell in order to cancel it out. But Ethel isn't done there because he then proceeds to chain cast an Ice Lance spell aimed right at Merlin, and she is so surprised by Ethel's casting speed that she barely has time to put up a barrier to protect herself. Ethel congratulates Merlin for reacting in time, but he says he can still go even faster and begins chain casting multiple level 7 ice spells at once. Merlin matches Ethel's pace by chain casting barriers, rapidly firing them off like he's got a switch on it, without giving Merlin any time to rest, but then Ethel sends an even stronger icicle her way, and it is at this point that Merlin realizes that Ethel is testing her rather than trying to overwhelm her with raw power. She tells him not to underestimate her, and puts up a barrier to defend against the icicle. In terms of magical energy refinement, Merlin's level 7 spells should be more powerful, but despite that, she is still being pushed back. And Ethel explains that it's because her casting still has some small imperfections in the process, so even with high mana purity, she won't be able to block his icicle like that. He points out that the flow of mana inside her spell isn't perfectly stable, and those tiny inconsistencies are enough for his attacks to gradually break through. As Merlin hears Ethel explain to her why she's losing, she is reminded of how her master used to give her lessons on what she was doing wrong, even in the middle of battle, and it motivates her to try even harder, so she digs deep and begins the process of multicasting the perfect wall spells. By doing this, she creates 2-layered perfect walls, which are enough to block Ethel's icicle, and Ethel is excited when he sees Merlin pull this off because it proves she understood his advice immediately. But he reminds her that multicasting takes a lot of focus and mental energy, which leaves you open to attack immediately afterwards. He then rushes in to take advantage of the opening, but Merlin had actually anticipated Ethel's attack and placed a teleportation spell ahead of time to get her out of the way. And while Ethel was still mid-swing, she launches another fireball at him, hoping to end the match. To the crowd, it looks like Ethel is really done for this time, but Merlin smiles as she realizes that her spell didn't hit Ethel at all, and he is currently standing in the stadium right behind her with a spell aimed at her back and ready to fire. He explains that he anticipated Merlin's anticipation of his attack and precast a teleportation spell to teleport him behind Merlin, and Merlin admits that she didn't see that coming. She finds the whole thing funny because Ethel defeated her using tactics that her master would have used, and even though Merlin should feel frustrated by this defeat since she has spent the last 400 years practicing those same tactics, she actually finds it quite nostalgic because it reminds her of the old days. She then asks Eftel if he's willing to indulge her for one last bout because she wants to see how her strongest attack will fare against him. And if he manages to stop it, she will admit defeat with no complaint. Eftel has no objections to this, so Merlin begins casting her most powerful spell. But Eftel is a little disappointed to see that Merlin's strongest spell is only a level 8 Thor's hammer. Merlin tells him he should pay more attention before judging it, and that's when Eftel realizes that there's a second magic circle on Merlin's other hand. This means she's double casting the Thor's hammer spell, and Eftel realizes this just in time to dodge the second lightning strike. Then Merlin reveals another magic circle around her foot, and a fourth one on her other foot, meaning she is quad casting Thor's hammer, something Eftel has never seen before, not even in his past life. Even Eftel has to admit that controlling 4 separate cast points for such a high-level spell requires incredible concentration and precision. Most people would struggle to double cast even regular spells, let alone quad cast a level 8 spell, so Eftel is truly proud of what his student has managed to accomplish in the years since he died. To show his sincerity towards Merlin's efforts, Eftel decides to go all out as well and hit her with the most powerful spell in his arsenal, so he begins casting his level 10 lightning spell. Merlin fires her quadruple Thor's hammer at Eftel, but he isn't worried at all. In fact, he is smiling from ear to ear because he's so happy he got to see Merlin's growth like this, but she's still a long way off from catching up to him. He then activates his spell, and all of a sudden, a blindingly bright bolt of lightning is summoned, completely overpowering Merlin's spell. The enormous surge of magical energy sends violent bursts of energy sweeping across the arena, forcing everyone watching to shield their eyes from the overwhelming light. She can barely get a good look at it since it's so bright, but there's no mistaking that spell because she recognizes it as Eftel's original level 10 spell, and the only person who'd be capable of casting a spell like that is Eftel himself. Merlin is well aware of how devastating this lightning spell is, so she braces herself for impact. But just before the spell is about to hit, Eftel cancels it since he never actually intended to hurt Merlin over a simple duel. Eftel then slowly floats Merlin down to the ground. As she thinks back to what just happened, she realizes she was foolish to believe Eftel's story about being a mere descendant because there's only one person who could predict an opponent's moves so flawlessly on the spot and use that level 10 spell, and that's her master. As Eftel walks up to her to see if she's okay, Merlin asks him to tell her the truth about his identity, and after that display of power, Eftel can't exactly hide the truth anymore. So he admits that he is indeed her master reincarnated. He congratulates Merlin on a job well done because that last spell really impressed him. Merlin is overjoyed at the realization that her master is really alive again, and she's so moved that she begins crying tears of joy because she had been waiting 400 years for this moment. Just then, Anastasia comes running up to Eftel to warn him about some incoming trouble, but Merlin notices that Anastasia is calling Eftel master and connects the dots that she must be his slave. She then begins scolding Eftel for getting a slave when he's still only a student, but Eftel says it's not like that and explains that Anastasia just ran into a bit of trouble, so he's helping look after her for the time being. Anastasia then introduces herself to Merlin, and Merlin is still a little suspicious, but she knows Eftel must have his reasons, so she doesn't mind. That aside, Anastasia warns Eftel that there's a huge crowd of people heading this way, and when he turns to look, he is horrified to see that literally everyone who is in the stands is running right towards him in excitement because they've never seen such amazing magic before. Eftel realizes he probably should have expected something like this since he really didn't hold back during the match, but this isn't how he hoped his school life would turn out. Speaking of Eftel's school life, Merlin asks him why he chose to enroll in the academy anyway, so Eftel explains that he wanted to study magic as a student to figure out a way to improve, and when Merlin hears that, she comes up with an idea. She grabs Eftel's hand and tells him to run as they dash off to escape the crowd of people. A little while later, Eftel, Merlin, and Anastasia are still walking, and Eftel is starting to wonder how much farther they need to walk before they get there. But as Merlin says they are almost there, he starts realizing that this place looks awfully familiar. They soon come upon a mansion hidden in the forest, and Eftel recognizes this place because it was his old house back in his past life. He's surprised that it's still standing even after 400 years, but that's only because Merlin has been maintaining it for him. She then tells Eftel that he's going to have to wait a bit so she can get all the necessary paperwork done. But Eftel asks what paperwork she's talking about, and that's when Merlin reveals that she intends to fill out paperwork to officially adopt Eftel and Anastasia as her children. Eftel is shocked that Merlin would come up with such an idea, but Merlin thinks it's perfectly logical, and she promises to get the paperwork done as soon as possible so he can enroll in her academy. Eftel is completely speechless as she says this, And Merlin then starts giggling to herself because she never thought she'd get the opportunity to go to the same school as Eftel. She then starts talking about how they'll need to get a uniform made for him, but Eftel tells her to slow down and explain what she's talking about. Merlin explains that she intends to use her authority as the headmaster of the Altena Academy to get Eftel transferred over as soon as possible, and with her there, he'd be able to enroll without any trouble. Eftel is shocked to learn that Merlin wants him to enroll at the Altena Magic Academy, but she tells him it's a great idea. She's mostly excited about it because she'd get to spend a lot of time with Eftel, but now that Eftel thinks about it, going to a school with Merlin as the headmaster would grant him access to all the resources he'd need to continue his research. And he also likes the idea of getting to spend time with Merlin as well, so he agrees to go along with Merlin's plan, and he thanks her for always looking out for him. While Merlin is busy with the paperwork for Eftel's enrollment, he decides to head down into the treasury since, now that he is able to use a sword, he wants to try out one of the weapons he kept stored down here in his past life. However, as he and Anastasia are making their way down the hall towards the treasury, their path is suddenly blocked by a magic lamp, which spawns a genie. The genie demands that they stop and tells them that the treasury is off limits, so they are not allowed to enter. It then threatens to attack if they don't leave immediately, assuming they are thieves, and Anastasia is absolutely terrified. But Eftel calmly tells the genie that they aren't thieves, and he's just here to retrieve his katana, Raikiri. The genie is outraged that a little kid would dare to claim that Raikiri belongs to him because the genie knows for a fact that the legendary sword Raikiri is the possession of the Emperor of Lightning, and it is so powerful that Merlin ordered him to make sure no one even gets near it. He assumes Eftel and Anastasia must be Merlin's students or something since they are in the mansion, so he is going to be lenient with them and not attack. But he warns them that they had better leave while he's still being nice since even he has his limits. Eftel understands why there's a misunderstanding, and he tries to explain that he has the right to be here, but the genie gets fed up and yells at Eftel to quit lying and get out already. He then starts talking about how he can't believe that old hag took on a student like him, and he even mentions that he heard that Merlin's master was actually completely devoid of magic talent, so he assumes the whole legend about the Lightning Emperor's power must be exaggerated. Hearing the genie say that strikes a nerve with Eftel, so he coldly demands to know where the katana is, and even the genie gets spooked by how intense he sounded just then, so he ends up pointing Eftel towards it, but he warns him that he's only going to get himself hurt because the sword has protection magic on it that will vaporize anyone who touches it. However, Eftel simply grabs the sword and instantly casts level 8 Dispel magic to get rid of the protection spell, and as the genie sees this, he becomes terrified because he had no idea that Eftel was capable of using magic of that level. A few moments later, Merlin comes in and starts glaring at the genie because she could hear him call her a hag from outside, and she threatens to eviscerate him if he calls her that one more time. Just then, Eftel notices that Merlin is here, so he greets her, and Merlin instantly calms down once she starts talking to Eftel. She asks him what he's doing down here, so Eftel tells her that he remembered that his sword was down here, so he figured he might be able to get some good use out of it now. Hearing Merlin refer to Eftel with such respect, the genie finally pieces everything together and realizes that Eftel must be the genuine Lightning Emperor. He immediately begins apologizing to Eftel for his earlier rudeness, but Eftel tells him it's fine since he's not too upset about it. However, he asks the genie to remember his and Anastasia's faces because they are going to be living here from now on, and he doesn't want another situation like this happening again. After that, Merlin takes Eftel and Anastasia out into town to take their measurements for their new uniforms and have a nice meal. But even after all that, there's still a lot of time left to kill. So Merlin asks Eftel what he wants to do now. Hearing that the group is looking for something to do, the restaurant owner speaks up and tells them they might have some fun joining the town's treasure hunt. Eftel has no idea what that is, so the lady explains that there are several treasures hidden all across town, and the goal of the treasure hunt is to find as many of those treasures as possible. You get to keep whatever treasure you find, and on top of that, whoever collects the most treasures will win the grand prize of an all-expenses-paid trip to a hot spring. Merlin likes the idea of taking a trip to a hot spring since it sounds really relaxing, so she tells Eftel she thinks they should participate. But Eftel isn't sure it's really worth the effort. However, just then, he notices Anastasia staring at one of the treasure hunt posters, and since both Merlin and Anastasia want to do it, he decides to go for it. Anastasia has her eye on one of the treasures in particular, so Eftel wants to get it for her. But according to the poster, the treasure has a shape-shifting spell cast on it to make it harder for people to find. Anastasia suggests Eftel could cast the Dispel spell he used earlier to disable the shape-shifting magic so they can have an easier time finding the treasure. But Merlin tells her that probably isn't a good idea, since if Eftel were to use such a strong dispel spell out here, it would end up dispelling other spells as well. Anastasia doesn't understand what Merlin means, so she goes on to explain that though you may not be able to see it, there are actually a lot of spells cast throughout the city that help people with daily life, and if Eftel were to accidentally dispel all those spells, it would throw the city into chaos, so that isn't an option. However, Eftel says he can just specifically target the shape-shifting magic to make sure no other magic is affected. Merlin is surprised to hear that since she didn't think it was possible, but if anyone can do it, it's Eftel. Eftel manages to perfectly execute the spell, revealing the location of all the treasures, and thanks to that, by evening, he and the others have managed to gather more treasures than anyone else, winning them those hot spring tickets. Afterwards, Eftel heads home while Anastasia and Merlin head to the hot spring since he didn't feel like going, and later into the night, after Merlin returns, she goes up to Eftel and asks if he has a moment to talk because there's something she'd like to discuss with him. Eftel can tell that it's probably something serious, so he asks what it is, and Merlin explains that when she and Anastasia went to the hot spring together, she wanted to make sure that Anastasia had a body worthy of attending to Eftel's needs at night, so she spent a long time feeling her all over. Eftel smacks Merlin over the head when he hears this because he doesn't have that kind of relationship with Anastasia, and even if he did, it still wouldn't be fine to just touch her like that out of nowhere. Merlin apologizes, but there's actually something else she wanted to talk about because, while she was touching Anastasia, she happened to notice that she has a special slave crest, and she wanted to know if Eftel was aware of it. Eftel goes silent after she says this, but he confirms that he chose to keep Anastasia by his side despite knowing about the special slave crest. Merlin can't understand why, since the slave crest is the equivalent of walking around with a ticking time bomb, but Eftel doesn't want to hear any objections on the matter since he has no intention of abandoning Anastasia because of it, and he tells Merlin to drop the subject because he doesn't want to discuss it any further. The next day, Eftel and Anastasia are set to start at Merlin's academy as new students, but the second they step onto campus, Eftel is immediately met with dirty looks from all the students present because this academy is one that mostly admits demons and elves, and the other races don't get along particularly well with humans, so they are all outraged by the idea of having a human student join their class. Eftel more or less expected this since, after everything that happened in the war all those centuries ago, even though peace was eventually achieved, they still have lingering hatred towards humans, so it's natural that they'd look down on him. He decides to just ignore it since, at the end of the day, his goal is to study magic here, not to make friends, but just then, Eftel notices that Anastasia is frozen in fear for some reason, so he asks her if something is wrong, but she snaps out of it and tells him everything is fine. One of the demons gets Eftel's attention and asks him how he managed to get into a school like this since there's no way a human would be able to pass the entrance exam here. He bets that Eftel must have used some sort of connection to bribe his way into the academy, and as skilled as Eftel may be, he actually can't deny that since Merlin did pull a bunch of strings to get him accepted, so he chooses not to respond to Abe's provocation. He then takes his seat while everyone else in the class stares at him with contempt because they assume he barely knows how to use magic and doesn't deserve to be here. After a little while, an elf girl walks up to Eftel and apologizes for what Abe said since it was a little too harsh. However, the fact still remains that humans aren't well liked here, and though she is one of the few who doesn't discriminate based on race, she does discriminate based on talent, and her pride won't let her stay in the same class as someone who doesn't deserve to be here. So she tells Eftel that if he wants to survive at this school, he should do his best to keep his head down and stay out of their sight. Eftel can understand why everyone in class assumes he can't use magic, since it's true that the other races have more overall magic potential than humans do, and Eftel has already seen for himself how weak the magic of humans has become over the years. Just then the classroom door opens, and to Eftel's and the entire class's surprise, Merlin is the one who walks in. Merlin addresses the entire class and tells them all that, from today onwards, she will be personally teaching this class. All the students are shocked to hear this since Merlin almost never teaches classes personally, and Abe's ego tells him she must have heard about how skilled he is and wanted to see what he's capable of for herself, but Merlin actually has no idea who Abe is at all. Abe's pride takes a hit when he finds out that Merlin doesn't know who he is, so he tells her he's the one who has the best grades in the entire class. But while that certainly is impressive, she tells Abe she didn't come here for him, but rather for Eftel. The students can't believe Merlin has actually taken an interest in an insignificant human, and Abe is now even more certain that Eftel must have only gotten here through connections. Merlin isn't surprised that someone like Abe would think that, but she tells him that only a third-rate mage would judge people based on stereotypes like that. In fact, She tells the whole class that they should pay close attention to Eftel, because watching him will help them dispel all their preconceived notions about humans. Merlin was saying all this to try to make the students understand how awesome Eftel is, but this is the worst thing that could have happened to him because now everyone's attention is on him. So it's impossible for him to just blend into the background and focus on his research like he wanted to. After class, Abe and his lackeys approach Eftel because they still can't accept that someone like him has earned Merlin's favor. They ask Eftel who he really is, but Eftel doesn't really know how to respond to that question, and before he can think of an excuse, Abe suddenly accuses him of being that old hag's boy toy. He says he heard that Merlin often teaches poor human orphans magic in her spare time, and he assumes she must have taken Eftel for her own pleasure because she thought he was handsome. But Eftel doesn't take kindly to Abe spreading rumors in Merlin's name like that, and he gets so angry that he's about to lose his cool. But he calms himself down because beating Abe up would only make his school life here more complicated than it already is. Later on, Merlin is teaching class again, and she tells everyone that they have the inter-class competition coming up, and she still needs to select a candidate for the magic swordsman position. She immediately turns to Eftel, intending to pick him for the position, but Eftel ducks under his table because he doesn't want her to make him stand out any more than he already has. Just then, Abe raises his hand and says he'd like to volunteer for the magic swordsman fight, and technically Abe is fit for the position, but Merlin was really hoping to get Eftel to volunteer for it. However, Eftel has no intention of putting himself in the spotlight again. But just when he thought he was in the clear, Anastasia suddenly raises her hand and says she'd like to nominate Eftel for the position. And Eftel is left in shock because he doesn't understand why Anastasia would do this to him, while Abe has a massive smile on his face since now that Eftel has been nominated, he's going to get the chance to humiliate him. The duel between Abe and Eftel is officially set up, and Merlin announces that whoever wins here will be given the position of magic swordsman in the competition. The rules of this duel state that neither of them is allowed to use magic and must fight with nothing but their swordsmanship skills to win, but Eftel has no real intention of winning since that would just draw more attention to himself. He thinks Abe looks pretty strong, so he plans to throw a feint kick at him, and after he dodges it, Eftel can lose intentionally. But to his surprise, when he throws the kick, it connects directly with Abe's face because he didn't have enough time to react. Eftel is surprised that Abe couldn't react to a kick like this, and he assumes it must have just been a fluke and Abe just let him land the kick. But nope, that's not the case at all because a second later, Abe drops like a sack of potatoes. The others are shocked by just how easily Abe was defeated since they didn't realize Eftel was so strong. But then they all start talking amongst themselves and come to the conclusion that Eftel must be a human who is great at physical combat but sucks at magic. And Merlin brought him here as a special student because she wants to expand the academy's curriculum to include swordsmanship. Merlin has no idea what they are talking about since she never said anything like that, but Eftel thinks he'd be able to fit in easier if he just went along with the story, so he tells everyone that he is indeed a specially admitted swordsman who is really strong. But while everyone else seems to acknowledge Eftel's strength a little, Abe is still filled with nothing but contempt and fury toward Eftel after he made a fool of him like this. Later that night, Eftel sits down to have dinner with Anastasia, and Anastasia tells him she thinks he's amazing for defeating a strong opponent so easily like that, and Eftel thanks her for the compliment. But he isn't really proud of the battle since Abe was way weaker than he thought he'd be. Anastasia then asks Eftel what he would do in a situation where his strength couldn't help him, and after thinking for a bit, he says he just put in a lot of effort to make sure things work out. Anastasia tells him that isn't very helpful to her, because Eftel can only say that because he's already strong. She then asks if he'd still say that if it were a horrible fate that he couldn't change, and Eftel tells her that he's pretty much already facing a horrible, unchangeable fate because he came here to research a way to get past his bottle cap even though it may seem impossible. Anastasia admits that Eftel is right, and his perseverance really is amazing, but in contrast, she isn't anywhere near as impressive as him. Eftel tries to tell her that it's not true, but Anastasia points out that she is his slave, yet she hasn't been able to help him with a single thing thus far. So to make up for it, she offers to serve him with her body so she can be of use to him. However, Eftel has no intention of getting into that kind of relationship with Anastasia, so he asks her to just put her clothes back on because all he wants is to continue spending time and sharing meals with her. Hearing that Eftel is just happy to spend time with her makes Anastasia really happy, but it also makes her really sad at the same time because she knows she doesn't deserve Eftel's kindness. The next day, Merlin and Eftel return home to find that the entire treasury has been emptied out, and the genie is in tears, apologizing to Merlin because he didn't expect this to happen. Apparently, Anastasia came here earlier, and since Merlin already vouched for her, He decided to let her into the treasury, but she ended up stealing everything. Even though Anastasia just betrayed him, Eftel doesn't seem all that surprised since he knows what caused this, and so does Merlin. This was the result of the special slave crest which Anastasia has on her body alongside her regular slave crest. Normally, even as a slave, masters aren't allowed to give their slaves orders that would result in their death or result in a crime. But there is one way around this rule, and that's with the creation of a special slave crest. This allows a master to give any order to his slave, and even if the slave were to get a new master, the master of the special slave crest can retain control over the slave, which is why Merlin was so concerned about Eftel keeping Anastasia around. Eftel is sure that Anastasia's real master must have commanded her to rob them. Now, Eftel could just take the loss and accept that Anastasia is gone now, but there's no way he's actually doing that. So he tells Merlin that he's going to bring Anastasia back. Hearing Eftel say that, Merlin is really concerned since she gets the feeling he is going to try something crazy like breaking the special slave crest, and when Eftel confirms that that is exactly what he intends to do, she tells him he can't because the last time someone tried to break a special slave crest, it led to an entire city being destroyed. Eftel is aware of that, but it doesn't matter to him since he has no intention of giving up regardless. The special slave crest is upheld by a beast god, and if Eftel wants to get rid of the slave crest, then he's going to have to take care of the beast god to do so. But if he fails, it may end in the destruction of the entire city. Merlin asks Eftel why he is willing to go so far for Anastasia's sake when he barely knows her, but Eftel tells her that it's the same reason he took care of Merlin back then. She was in trouble, so he took her in, and no matter what, he is going to help her as much as he can. And the first step to that plan is tracking her down. But fortunately for Eftel, he made sure to put tracking spells on all of his treasures, so Anastasia will eventually lead him right to the master that ordered her to steal from him. A few hours of heavy cart pushing later, Anastasia finally arrives at the home of her real master to give a report on what she got, and it turns out that her master is Abe. Abe is ecstatic because he never thought he'd be able to get his hands on loot from Merlin's vault, and it's all thanks to the fact that Anastasia just so happened to transfer into the same class as him. Anastasia hadn't expected to run into Abe here, but from the moment he spotted her, she was no longer allowed to disobey his commands. Abe also demands to know why Anastasia didn't warn him about how strong Eftel was because she caused him to make a fool of himself. But in reality, after the first class, Abe pulled Anastasia aside and ordered her to create a situation where he'd get to face Eftel in battle, and Anastasia tried to warn him that he was no match for Eftel. But Abe was too full of himself to listen to her. So instead, he just ordered her to do as he said without another word from her. Explaining that to him would only make Abe angry, so Anastasia just tells him she has no idea that Eftel was that strong, and Abe accepts that answer. More importantly though, Anastasia asks him if he's going to keep his word and make this the last time he orders her to steal anything. Abe does admit that Anastasia did a really good job this time because the stuff she brought back was even better than last time when she stole from that fire mage. In total, this makes 5 times now, so technically, the special crest contract has been fulfilled for this generation, but Abe makes it clear to her that even though the contract has been fulfilled, it doesn't mean the crest is simply going to go away, since if Anastasia ends up having kids at any point, then the special slave crest is going to be passed down to them as well, and they will be forced to serve Abe's family just like she was. For now, he tells Anastasia to head to her room while he goes to discuss with his father about what they should do with her now, and Anastasia has no choice but to thank Abe and obey his instructions. Anastasia always comes back here after completing a heist to give a report to Abe, but she always feels disgusted with herself after the fact, and she feels especially bad this time because she betrayed Eftel's trust. But at least now it's finally over, and the only things she can think back to are what happened to her sister. Back when Anastasia was little, she didn't get to see her sister much because she was always away from the village for work, and Anastasia hated her because whenever she did come back, she was always mean to her, so they'd argue non-stop. Their father ran over to break up the fight and told the two of them they shouldn't be arguing so much, but Tatiana just changes the subject, and since her dad is here, she tells him she has something for him. She gives him a small handful of gold coins, and she apologizes for not being able to get them anymore, but this should be enough to get them by for a few more months. Tatiana's dad was extremely grateful to her, and apologized to her as well because he knows it must be hard handling everything out there by herself. But Anastasia, on the other hand, was not grateful in the slightest and berated Tatiana for only bringing back so little money for them when she gets to go out and have fun with all her fancy clothes and stuff. Their father tries to tell Anastasia not to say stuff like that since Tatiana works very hard to protect their family, But Anastasia doesn't understand any of it because Tatiana barely ever comes home, and whenever she does, she's always mean to Anastasia. So Anastasia believes Tatiana doesn't care about her, so she says she hates Tatiana as well. However, when she says this, Tatiana doesn't get upset or argue back. She just smiles and tells Anastasia that she will be leaving now. After that, Anastasia didn't see Tatiana anymore until a few years later, when all of a sudden, several carriages rolled into the village and a tarp was dropped on the ground containing the body of Anastasia's sister. Anastasia was mortified when she saw her sister's dead body in there, and she didn't understand how this could have happened. But all of a sudden, Abe and his father got out of the carriage, and while Anastasia is still grieving over her sister's body, a magic restraint forms over her wrist as Abe asks if this girl is going to be the next special slave. Abe's father then turned to Anastasia's father and demanded an answer, and Anastasia's father was forced to confirm that Anastasia was indeed his second daughter. So Abe and his father ordered their servants to prepare for the crest transfer ritual. It was then that Anastasia found out that her ancestors had once attempted to rob and attack the Portas clan 300 years ago, and as punishment for turning against their fellow demons, Anastasia's clan was marked with a special slave crest that would be passed down from generation to generation, and they were forced to serve the Portas family forever. That is why now, each generation of Anastasia's family is required to present the Portas family with 5 artifacts. And Anastasia's sister had been trying to bear the task all by herself, and she did manage to get 3 artifacts by infiltrating the estates of nobles as a slave and stealing from them, but she ended up getting caught and beaten to death for it. Now, it's going to be Anastasia's job to fulfill the rest of the quota for this generation. So the ritual was conducted to transfer the special slave crest to Anastasia. It has been 3 years since then, and Anastasia is just glad she can finally put this whole mess behind her because she managed to fulfill the contract. But to her utter dismay, when Abe returns, he tells her he wants her to get him 3 more artifacts by herself. Anastasia gets up and yells that that wasn't part of the deal, but Abe doesn't really care what the deal was because as long as Anastasia has that special crest on her, she has to do whatever he tells her. When Abe informed his father that Anastasia had managed to steal the legendary sword, Raikiri, and since she did so well, he simply didn't want to let Anastasia go just yet. Abe tells her that if she's lucky enough to survive, then she'll just have to have a few children, so they can pass the crest on to the next unlucky generation. But Anastasia still can't accept this, because if they can change the rules whenever they want, then what did her sister die for? Abe is getting a kick out of seeing Anastasia in so much despair, so he decides to let her in on a little secret and informs her that the fight that got Anastasia's ancestors branded as criminals and forced to bear the special slave crest was actually caused by the Portas family. Anastasia is in complete shock when she hears this, and Abe goes on to tell her about how his family attacked Anastasia's ancestors, and then, after defeating them, they framed them as the culprits and got them branded as slaves for eternity. It always makes him laugh when he sees the look on their faces when they find out the truth, and he recalls that Anastasia's sister had the same look on her face as well. Anastasia is so overwhelmed that she gets up and walks out of the Portas estate with a blank expression on her face, and Abe just lets her go because no matter what she does, as long as she has that crest on her, she will be forced to return here every 6 months. Anastasia has completely given up hope at this point because no matter what she does, she will never be able to escape Abe and his family. She ends up wandering into town and gets cornered by a group of delinquents who find out that she's an unclaimed slave, and they take her into an alley intending to have some fun with her. And Anastasia has lost the will to live, so she doesn't even bother trying to get away from them. However, before anything could happen, Eftel manages to find her in the alley and chases the guys off, and Anastasia is surprised to see him here because she didn't expect Eftel to bother helping her after what she did to him. Without turning around, Eftel asks her why she stole from him and left without saying a word, and Anastasia assumes he must be mad at her. So she immediately starts apologizing and explains that she didn't want to betray him, but her special slave crest forced her to do so. However, that's not what Eftel meant, so he rephrases the question and asks her why she didn't tell him about it beforehand so he could have helped her. But Anastasia says there would have been no point in doing that because the special slave crest is impossible to remove because it is enforced by a god, so even someone as talented as Eftel wouldn't be able to get rid of it. But Eftel asks her who decided that. In case she hasn't already figured it out by now, he tells her that he is the genuine reincarnation of the Lightning Emperor, and though Anastasia finds it a little hard to believe, it's hard to deny Eftel's claim after everything she has seen him do so far. Eftel tells her that he decided to take her in knowing full well the risks that came with it, so he isn't going to abandon her over something like this. And hearing him say that, Anastasia breaks down in tears and begs Eftal to save her because she can't live her life like this anymore, and Eftal tells her she can leave it to him. The next morning, Abe is meeting with an appraiser to have the katana Anastasia stole for him assessed, and the man is astonished because he can tell that this is the genuine Raikiri blade used by the Lightning Emperor centuries ago. He has no idea how Abe managed to find such a national treasure, but it has great historical value, so it's worth a ton. The merchant offers to buy it from him for a total of 5,000 gold coins, which is quite the hefty sum, and Abe is delighted since it's basically free money, so he agrees to sell it for 5,000 gold. The merchant is glad they were able to come to an agreement, but he doesn't have 5,000 gold on him right now, so he says he will return with the money at a later date to complete the sale. Abe couldn't be happier with how well everything has been working out for him lately, and he's sure he's going to make even more money when Anastasia returns with the next batch of stolen goods. But as he is taking a walk outside, he is surprised to see that Anastasia has already returned once more. He walks up to her with a smug grin on his face and asks if she has finally accepted that she will never be able to escape him no matter where she goes, but in reality, Anastasia is here to ask him to return the katana. Last night, after Anastasia explained the entire situation to Eftal, he said he understood and told her to come with him because the first thing they need to do is go get his katana back. Anastasia was surprised that that was all Eftal had to say because she thought he'd be mad at her because of what she did. After all, she did rob him and betray his trust. Eftal doesn't see why he should be mad at her for that because it's not like she wanted to do all that stuff, but while that may be true, it doesn't change the fact that she did it. And she will likely do it again because of this crest at some point in the future. But Eftal tells her that doesn't have to be the case. He reminds her that even though her sister was bound by the same slave crest, she never gave up hope and did everything she could to protect Anastasia until the bitter end. After hearing this, Anastasia finally understands the significance of what Eftal told her the first day they arrived in town. He said that if anything upset her, it's okay for her to say so and try to change it, and she hadn't really taken those words to heart at the time. But now she realizes Eftal was trying to show her that she has free will and doesn't have to accept whatever happens to her simply because she's a slave. She swears that she's going to do things differently from now on, but before that, she has one request she'd like to make. We then cut back to Anastasia telling Abe to return Eftal's sword, and it pisses Abe off that Anastasia would dare to speak to him like that. So he grabs her by the shirt and yells at her for being disrespectful towards her master, telling her to remember her place as his slave. However, Anastasia remains unfazed and simply demands yet again that he return the sword. This pisses Abe off even more because he can't stand being told what to do, so he tells Anastasia that he can have her disposed of any time he wants and lifts her up in the air. Anastasia is terrified, but she refuses to beg for forgiveness or run away because coming here to face Abe was her choice. She tightens her grip on his arm and tells him she's done doing what his family wants, and Abe honestly can't believe Anastasia actually had the guts to say something like that. He assumes it must have been Eftal who gave her such confidence, but Eftal doesn't seem to be around here right now. So he decides to take this opportunity to teach Anastasia a painful lesson about what happens when you defy him. He takes out the sheath of the katana and begins beating Anastasia with it over and over again, but no matter how much he hits her, Anastasia still remains defiant, and Abe is starting to grow impatient. He decides to give Anastasia some more intense punishment to teach her her place, but he tells her she doesn't need to worry about dying since he will make sure to stop just short of killing her. After all, he wouldn't want to lose his money-making slave. Anastasia is genuinely terrified at this point, but it's too late for her to run away because Abe has already swung the sword at her. However, before the sword could connect, Eftal appears and catches it with his bare hands. He tells Anastasia she did a good job lasting this long, and Abe is left speechless when he sees Eftal because he assumed he wasn't here. It turns out that last night, when Anastasia said she had a favor to ask, she told Eftal that she still blames herself at least partially for what happened, so she'd like to atone for her crime against Eftal, and she asked him to let her do it on her own so she could make up for betraying his trust. Eftal agreed to it since he could tell how much it meant to Anastasia, and that's why she came to confront Abe, knowing fully well that he would never agree to return the blade and would likely beat her up because suffering the beating was her way of punishing herself. However, Eftal tells her that she has already atoned more than enough, so there's no need to let Abe hit her any longer, and Anastasia breaks down in tears once more, apologizing for what happened. Abe yells at Eftal and tells him that he may have come all the way here to save Anastasia, but there's nothing he can do because she was his slave from the beginning. However, since Eftal is here anyway, Abe decides to cut him down as well alongside Anastasia, and then he bursts into maniacal laughter, but listening to his grating voice is starting to really annoy Eftal. So he tells Abe that he's not going to touch another hair on Anastasia's head ever again, and then proceeds to punch him square in the jaw, sending him flying across the courtyard. Abe lands ass up in the grass, and when he finally makes it back to his feet, he is outraged that Eftel would actually dare to lay his hands on him in his own estate. He yells at the top of his lungs that he's going to make Eftel pay for this, and he points out that since both he and Anastasia are already on his property without his permission, he can consider them to be intruders, in which case, he is fully within his rights to send the 300 bodyguards he keeps on staff after them. And even though he knows Eftel is stronger than him, there's no way he can beat 300 men at once like this. Abe then gives the order for all his men to attack all at once, but instead of facing them in a fist fight, Eftel raises his hand and prepares to use magic. Abe laughs at this, because while he acknowledges Eftel's physical strength, he doubts a human like him is even capable of using the most basic level 1 spell. But to his utter disbelief, Eftel casts a level 7 wind spell in an instant, sending all 300 of Abe's men flying away, along with Abe and his entire mansion. By the time the spell is over, Abe comes crashing down to the ground, and his mansion has been absolutely leveled, so he has nothing left. However, he tells Eftel that this doesn't mean he has won, because no matter what he does, Anastasia is still going to be bound by that slave crest. Just then, Merlin arrives on the scene, and Eftel had already explained the whole thing to her ahead of time, so she had been out trying to recover the items that were stolen. But unfortunately, she reports that most of the stuff had already been sold off, so they won't be able to get it back. Eftel is disappointed to hear that, but there's nothing he can do about it, so he decides to just let it go. Additionally, Merlin mentions that she did a little digging into the affairs of the Port's family, and from what she found, it looks like they are involved in all sorts of shady dealings, including drug, human, and stolen goods trafficking. Eftel isn't too surprised to hear that since he expected as much from Abe, but with the evidence Merlin managed to gather, it's safe to say that the Porter's family won't be able to get away with it any longer. Merlin also informs Abe that effective immediately, he is no longer welcome at her academy, so he shouldn't even think about showing his ugly face there ever again. And Abe faints when he hears those words because he really has lost everything now. They won't need to worry about Abe for a while now, but Anastasia still feels terrible because of all the treasures she stole. The only thing left is Eftel's sword, so she once again apologizes to him for it. But Eftel tells her she doesn't need to worry about that anymore. More importantly, he asks her if facing Abe made her feel a little better, and Anastasia tells him it really did. She promises that she won't give up on herself anymore after this, and she says she is sincerely grateful to Eftel for helping her take control of her fate, and Eftel is just glad to see that she's happy. With Abe taken care of and the Porta's family reported, the only thing left to do is take care of Anastasia since she still has the special slave crest on her body. Anna asks him what he intends to do, so Eftel informs her that he's going to forcibly break the contract. She is taken aback when she hears this and reminds Eftel that the contract was made with a god beast as its enforcer, and the beast is so strong that even an entire country wouldn't be able to defeat it. But in spite of all that, Eftel still intends to face it because he was serious when he said he was going to save Anastasia. He tells her he's going down into the basement to go get ready for his battle, and while he's doing that, Anna asks Merlin if she can take her down to the treasury because she'd like to apologize to the genie for tricking him. The genie is definitely pissed at Anna for stealing the treasures right under his nose like that, but she tells him she's really sorry for breaking his trust and promises never to do it again. The genie doesn't really accept her apology, but since Merlin and Eftel already forgave her, he can't hold it over her head forever. That said, he does tell Anna that she's banned from coming into the treasury by herself, so if she wants to get in, she has to come with either Eftel or Merlin, and Anna agrees to those terms. But she actually has one more request she wanted to ask before she leaves, so the genie asks what it is, and Anna explains that she wants to clean the treasury. It's an odd request, but she is given permission to do so, and she explains that she has been thinking about ways she could make up for what she did, and she figured this was a good way to show her sincerity. Merlin understands why Anna wanted to help clean, but she warns her to be careful about what she touches in here, because there are still a ton of treasures and cursed tools that are used in ancient rituals, and it'd be very bad if she accidentally activated one. Anna had no idea there were curses in here, so she asks Merlin what kind it is, and Merlin picks up one of the cursed boxes so she can explain what it does to Anna. But just as she lifts the box, a mouse pops out from the shelf, which startles her so much that she ends up falling over with the box in her hand. And the next thing she knows, both she and Anna have been turned into kids. Merlin realizes that this must have been caused by the curse, so she tries to cast Dispel on herself so she can return to normal. But for some reason, her magic isn't working. And she can't even ask the genie for help right now because without her magic sustaining him, he can't maintain a physical form. Anna suggests they should go find Eftel since he is sure to have a way to help them return to normal. But Merlin doesn't want to bother him with a minor problem like this since he's already busy preparing for his battle with the contract god. Anna understands that, but at this rate, neither of them are going to be able to return to their normal forms, so she's starting to get worried. Merlin assures Anna that there's no need to worry because with all the books in here about curses, she's sure she'll be able to figure out a way to get them back to normal even if she isn't able to use her magic. However, just then, Merlin realizes that none of those books are actually here right now because she took all of them with her to the academy a few days ago for research. Anna asks what they are going to do, so Merlin tells her they have no choice but to go to the academy to get the books. Anna asks her if that's really okay since if anyone at the academy finds out that she was cursed, it would damage her reputation. But Merlin is willing to take that chance since she'd be much more embarrassed if Eftel found out about this. Later that day, Merlin and Anna sneak into the academy, and to avoid being seen, they hide in the bushes, but Merlin accidentally makes some noise, which draws the attention of one of the guards on patrol. He begins approaching the bush, but just as he's about to inspect it and find the two of them, Anna comes up with the idea to make some cat noises. And her cat impression was so good that the guard actually believes it's just a cat in the bushes, so he decides to leave it alone. Merlin is relieved they didn't get found out, and she thanks Anna for getting them out of that mess, but Anna says she didn't do anything praiseworthy. They then make their way into the building, and Merlin explains that all the books should be located in the dean's office. Anna asks how they are supposed to get into the office, but Merlin assures her that it won't be a problem since she has the keys to the room, but as they are making their way through the halls, they end up having to hide because a pair of students walk by, and Merlin overhears them talking about her and calling her an old hag, which really sets her off, so she runs out into the hallway and yells at them. The students are terrified because they recognize Merlin's voice, but when they turn around, they are surprised to see no one there. Anna had pulled Merlin back into cover and is covering her mouth to stop them from blowing their cover, but Merlin isn't letting this go, and she's going to make sure she gives them a long lecture once she's back to normal. Just then, Maria happens to walk by, and she immediately notices Merlin and Anna since she thinks it's weird that there are two kids in the academy, so she walks up to them and asks what they are doing. Merlin has no idea what to say, but Anna thinks quickly and claims that the two of them are actually Headmistress Merlin's relatives. The story isn't hard to believe since Maria can see that they do look a lot like Merlin, but that still doesn't explain what they are doing in the halls. Anna goes on to explain that they were heading to the dean's office to study some of the books on curses, and Maria thinks it's impressive that kids their age are working so hard to learn, so she offers to show them the way to the office. This was a little unexpected since they had intended to avoid being seen by anyone, but since Maria hasn't figured out who they really are, it shouldn't be a problem. They eventually arrive at the office door, and both Merlin and Anna thank her for her help so far, but they say they'll be fine from here because they have the key and can get in on their own. Maria is a little disappointed that the kids don't need her anymore, but she agrees to leave and starts walking away. However, when Merlin puts the key in the lock and tries to open it, she realizes that she forgot an important detail. The key requires you to use magic to activate it, and since neither she nor Anna can use magic right now, there's no way for them to get in. They need help from someone who can use magic, so they both start running to catch up to Maria and ask for her help opening the door. Maria is delighted to be of service to such cute kids, so she follows them back and helps unlock the door as requested. But once that's done, Merlin once again tells her that they can handle things from here, and Maria is forced to leave yet again. Anna and Merlin then walk over to the desk to get one of the grimoires, but as they try to open it, it doesn't budge, and that's when Merlin realizes that the grimoire also needs magic to be unlocked, so she and Anna once again go running after Maria, and Maria is so happy to see that they still need her. She returns to the office with them and unlocks the book, but this time, she says she's going to wait here with them since if there are any other books they want to read, they'd probably need her help opening them, so it'd be quicker if she just stayed here to help. Merlin and Anna realize she's right, so the three of them spend the next few hours in the office looking through the books, and eventually, Merlin finds exactly what she was looking for. This book has information about the curse that was cast on them, and it apparently says that if they want to break the curse, they need to bathe in the scent of the Unotran fruit. Maria recalls that there are some Unotran fruits growing in the greenhouse, so she offers to go get some for the kids, but Merlin tells her there's no need because they can do it by themselves, and Maria is once again disappointed that she doesn't get to help them out more, but she agrees to let them do it by themselves and just reminds them to not stay out too late. Merlin can tell that Maria was disappointed, and he really does appreciate all the help she has given them so far, but they still need to keep their real identities hidden, so they need to do the rest on their own. After that, Merlin and Anna head over to the greenhouse where they find the Unotran tree, and after going through a lot of effort to pick the Unotran fruits from the tree, they eventually make it back home with them. However, they aren't really sure how they are supposed to use these things to break the curse since the book wasn't really clear on that. Anastasia assumes they must need to eat it, but when she takes a bite out of the fruit, it tastes awfully bitter, so there's no way they can eat a whole basket of it. While they are busy arguing about how exactly they are meant to undo the curse, the commotion draws Eftel's attention, and he immediately recognizes the two of them in their child forms. He brings them inside, and they explain everything that happened and apologize for not telling him about it sooner, but Eftel isn't really mad about it. They ask him if he has any idea how they are supposed to use the Unitron fruit to fix themselves, and as a matter of fact, Eftel knows exactly what to do, so he tells them they are going to a hot spring tomorrow. Merlin and Anna don't really understand why, but they go along with it, and the next day, while getting into the hot spring, Eftel throws the Unitrans in the water with them, which makes the entire bath smell like the fruit, and that's what finally breaks the curse, and Eftel is glad to see that they are back to normal. A little while later, after Eftel has gotten out of the bath, Anna and Merlin spend some time talking, and Anna mentions how amazing Eftel is because he was able to figure out a solution to the problem they spent the entire day trying to solve. But Merlin says that's just how he has always been. Anna is a little jealous of how much Merlin knows about Eftel since she was there during his past life, but Merlin tells her that if anyone should be jealous, it's her because Eftel has been giving Anna a ton of special treatment ever since she got here. He has saved her countless times already, and even now, he's preparing to face the beast god just to protect Anna because when he sees someone in need of help, he can never just abandon them. Later that night, they all sit down to have dinner together, and Eftel has been meaning to ask Merlin about this, but he doesn't understand why magic became so weak over the years, and Merlin informs him that it was because of an event called the Magic Burst. About 10 years after Eftel died, a giant monolith appeared in the world out of nowhere, and after people went to investigate it, it exploded, releasing a large wave of corrupted magical energy, which weakened magic all across the world. So now, no one is able to use magic above level 9 anymore. Eftel seems to have been unaffected since he reincarnated after the Magic Burst, but he is probably the only person alive right now who is capable of using level 10 spells. Eftel is disappointed to hear that since he was hoping Merlin would be able to help him with some high-level spells in the battle tomorrow, but he's going to make it work somehow. And he promises that he will get that special slave crest off Anna no matter what.